a meetup group called Single Moms by Choice, and I went to a couple Zooms, and that was really helpful to just kind of see what other women were thinking about. There were other single mom by choice women on there. And then I did talk
So are some of them mentors that are speaking, and then there's a lot of other people who are just going through this same process with you at the same time?
Kind of an open forum, and a couple of them had topics. So I only did a couple of those, but then I talked to friends. I'm an open book, as you know, and I don't really love small talk, so I go right into the nitty gritty with like pretty much anyone I know. And a lot of people
are.
We're all chosen for something in life. Maybe it's purpose, maybe it's connection, maybe it's that next big step. Whatever it is, let's take that leap.
Welcome to today's episode of JonesingLife. I am joined here today with my friend from over 2 decades ago, Sumee Oh. She, 2 years ago, you took on the title of mother. And if you end up doing a pretty good job, you will get the title of mom. Now, Sumee, one thing before I let you introduce yourself, you have an interesting title of mother, and we can debate on what it's exactly called. But some people would say you're a single mother of choice, an independent mom, solo mom. But with that, Sumee, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about your story and how you came into motherhood. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. I'm happy to be here. I definitely am excited to talk about, what is more commonly known as single mom by choice, or maybe I like the idea of intentional motherhood, because I definitely want to someday, hopefully, have a partner in life. But I definitely knew I wanted to be a mom too.
So you're in your 40s, and you are someone who's extremely attractive, extremely hardworking, funny, supportive, but you get to a stage where you might say, I had this plan growing up. I was going to be married or in a committed relationship, whatever it is by then, and easily have kids. But sometimes the plan doesn't go as you scripted it. When did you decide, or when did you start thinking, I want to have kids regardless if I'm in a relationship or not?
So the idea kind of came up, when I was in my early 30s, and was like, okay, I definitely should freeze my eggs at some point if I have the means. And so I kind of, it was like floating around there. But then when I got closer to 35, 36, I was like, okay, this is something that I probably should really consider. Could I, become a mom by myself? And then I was like talking about it out loud with friends.
Yeah. So that I was going to ask is you probably internalize it first. Am I going to do this? And I don't know if you're parallel processing, if you're out there. At the time, I think you were living in Manhattan Beach. If you go, can I meet Mr. Right? And if it's not Mr. Right, there's something else out there. And maybe even more important, I want to have a child.
Yeah. It's that idea of the biological clock. And it became more and more apparent as our friends, started having kids. And most of our friends did have a lot of kids, kids later in life. And they're going through the journey of fertility. And they were really just highlighting like, hey, like 35 is not necessarily like a cliff dive, but it is when things start going a little slower or not as easy to conceive. So, freeze your eggs or have a kid. So...
And I will take this conversation from my point of view.
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm a guy, you're a girl. My biological clock doesn't tick as fast as yours. And I could probably have kids much later on in life. But what I will say is age. Someone who's having kids when they're in their young 20s, they have a ton of energy. And they where they lack maybe the funding, whereas as an older parent, a lot of times you have the funds. And if the child you have doesn't enjoy the binky, I'll buy 5 binkies until I find that right one that makes them calm. But you decide you're in your mid-30s, you froze your eggs, and think about all the development within science that has occurred. If you go back 100 years, which would be the 90s, there was not women who were single for the most part. Maybe there was tragedies that had occurred that they lost their spouse, but I think it was even common at that point in time that they might get remarried. Fast forward to the 60s and the 70s, you start having contraceptive contraceptives that somewhat give women some financial independence. In the 90s, you start getting IVF. You started going in the 2010s, and women are able to freeze their eggs. It's a unique. You and other women within the last couple decades are really setting a stage and breaking glass ceilings on having families, and without necessarily two parents that are there.
Yep. I was really fortunate that when I got my job at NBC that there was fertility coverage. And so that kind of really solidified my path to go through at least the initial first step of egg freezing. Because like you said, when we were in our 20s and the idea of egg freezing, it was very expensive. It's still expensive, but not as expensive. And obviously when I had coverage, it just made it a clear decision to, okay, I should really pursue egg freezing because I know I always wanted to be a mom. And obviously at that time, I was kind of with the expectation that eventually I would meet someone and it would give me a little bit more insurance that I could biologically have a child.
Because I'm sure even as going through the dating scene at a certain point in time, some people want to have families, some people don't want to have families, and at least you want to have the option that's out there. And I think in life, with whatever you do, is have as many options as possible to be able to make the decision that's always right for you. So you got your eggs frozen, which at least allows you a little bit of flexibility in your time frame to make a decision. From the time you got your eggs frozen to what is the next step after you get your eggs frozen? I don't know.
I mean, I froze my eggs at 37 and at 38. I mean, and the doctor did say that if my number one goal was to have a successful live birth and carry the child, then she did suggest, that I do it by the time I was 40. I mean, I was
and why is that?
But I was a little bit late just because there's a lot of considerations with, being a mother of either what they used to call geriatric age, or now it's advanced maternal age. There's like a lot of complications that can happen. So higher frequency of miscarriage, higher frequency
so
of
nothing to do with the eggs, but more to do with your body.
I think both. It's viability of a live birth, from the health of the eggs that I was creating and my body to be able to carry it, and then my body to be able to successfully birth a baby.
So so the next step is, if I'm going to do this, I got to do it in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
There is a time frame, right? So now a year goes by pretty quickly. Yeah. In your late 30s, late 40s, I get it.
And I did want to go through experience of carrying the baby. I wanted to go through pregnancy.
Versus adopting, which is always another option.
Adopting or surrogacy, which I didn't have the means for. And then the adoption thing, I was maybe going to consider further down the line if I couldn't have one biologically. But I really, call it narcissism or whatever, but I really just wanted to have a piece of me existing.
That's fine. Fatherhood, motherhood, mom and dad is something that is so special. I'm in a wonderful marriage. I have a partner that I support. But there is something, at least at this youth, you never knew how much you could love something.
Totally.
And there's a joke that's out there that's not a joke. This is true. I know if something were to happen, there are 2 young children that I would take a bullet for. No questions of my mind. And then someone goes, well, would you take a bullet for your wife? And I was like, she's got a dad for that. So, but it is amazing how a piece of you, who knows, biological, but this is happening since the dawn of time, you love that child so much.
Yeah.
So you wanted a piece of yourself, so you decide we're gonna have the eggs. And are you, at this point in time, how are you looking for that second aspect? So you have the X chromosome in the X, but you need an XX for a daughter or an XY for a boy. How are you finding that extra set of chromosomes?
So I did join a meetup group called Single Moms by Choice, and I went to a couple Zooms, and that was really helpful to just kind of see what other women were thinking about. There were other single mom by choice women on there. And then I did talk
So are some of them mentors that are speaking, and then there's a lot of other people who are just going through this same process with you at the same time?
Kind of an open forum, and a couple of them had topics. So I only did a couple of those, but then I talked to friends. I'm an open book, as you know, and I don't really love small talk, so I go right into the nitty gritty with like pretty much anyone I know. And a
You
lot of
definitely are.
people will introduce, other intentional moms, as I wanted to start calling it. And that was really helpful. So shout out to Susie. She was really helpful. She has 2 kids on her own. And I just asked her about her experience and how she went about it, how she decided. And that was really helpful. One, to not feel alone or intimidated by the process, but just also to listen to things that maybe I didn't consider. I obviously read a little bit too. I'm not the super planner like some of our friends. I plan a little bit, but I kind of go through obstacles as they come.
But you're not necessarily shooting from the hip when
No.
you decide to have a child. Now,
Yeah.
there are certain situations. Someone goes out, they have a great night,
I know, I wish.
and they have a child. Because even as we talk about this, there are other single mothers that are out there. There are individuals who started off in a committed relationship. Something happens, the father's gone. There are
Yeah.
situations where
Of course.
someone has a one night stand and you never see the father ever again. There are children that in our neighborhood that I know that a tragedy occurred and
Yeah.
the father's no longer there. And someone who initially set up not knowing they were going to be a single mom. And kudos to every single mom, every single dad that's out there who's raising children, because it's not easy. But back to you kind of in the process. How do you go about choosing a partner?
I mean, I joked with a lot of people that, I wish I kind of had, I had a crazy night and accidentally got knocked up in my 30s, because I would have considered it a little more critically. If I was 25 and accidentally knocked up, there's no question that I would have been like, I am not ready for this. I can't do this.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's crazy when you go through the fertility journey of how much you don't know. When I was in my 20s, I just thought I was the most fertile being in the world. And when you're in your, mid to late 30s, you're like, oh my God, it's really hard to actually get pregnant. So
You got to do it on a couple days, and everything's got to be perfect for it to happen. I mean, it is very interesting when young individuals get pregnant, because as you get older in life, people are very systematic about it. People are building out
it's hard.
businesses on how to get pregnant. And also think about how lucky we as a generation are right now, that all the tools and science that's available to us, that if you do want to get pregnant, it's a lot easier. Whereas I know that our parents' generation, sometimes whether the man or the woman was just not fertile, that kind of meant the end of it. And that's fine too. But if you wanted to have kids, I'm glad that there's options out there today that allow you to do that.
And especially in America too, because they do allow, many countries don't allow single mom by choice or even IVF for couples. So that was actually really interesting to learn as well. But once I wrapped my head around wanting to fertilize my eggs, because the doctors did let me know that, go any step you can eliminate during the IVF process will lead to a better chance of success. And so when I did my first round of egg freezing, I actually did consider making embryos as well. But then a friend brought up, oh, but what if you meet someone? And I was like, oh. And I wish I had kind of maybe did half of them so that I could preserve some of my eggs, still maybe with the hope of meeting someone.
I'm going to pause right. If you decide you do want to meet someone, we started off the conversation, very attractive, very funny, very caring. Those are things people are looking for. I remember when I first moved to Orlando, and I was young, 26, 27, 28. And when I went on a date with a young lady at the time, she was a little bit older than me, and she had 2 children. They'd be like 6 and 4. And for a 28-year-old, at least for me, 6 and 4 was well raised. She actually made a comment to me. She goes, it's amazing how many older guys were attracted to her, especially with older children, not infants where you're still changing diapers, cleaning up, and they're really dependent on adults. But I don't know if this was a kind of an analogy. She's like, add water and here's my family.
Right.
You don't have to go through the struggles. And I even see that within my children. And at one point in time, I think we were considering a 3rd child, and all of a sudden the youngest was no longer having dirty diapers. Wet diapers are different than dirty, but as soon as the dirty diapers were done, life is so much easier. The kids can get in the cars. But go back. So you decide the embryos are not fertilized. How do you go about the next step, which is fertilizing them?
So I obviously went through every avenue. I knew it probably would end up with going through a sperm donor. And so, I mean, I did ask, single men that I knew that I thought would be good pedigree if they would consider, donating. And one actually did kind of think about it, but it just became too much about knowing that there was someone out there with his genetic makeup. Obviously, I said no strings attached. Like I wouldn't expect anything, but so I had one.
And I could see that occurring, saying,
yeah, it's a lot.
Knowing it, right?
Yeah.
There is responsibilities. I mean, simple things. You sign up to volunteer for coach a kid's sports team, and you go, okay, well, I got to be at practice every day. Well, this is something that's even a little bigger than that. You go, no matter what, you talked about having a little piece of you.
Yeah, and that even though that person didn't sign up for anything, once that child becomes an adult and if, they want to seek something out. So anyway, so I knew I was going to go for a sperm bank. And so I started doing research on that. And I was very specific that if I was doing this by myself, I might as well be as vain as possible. So I was really interested in finding a bank that had adult photos because I feel like, everyone's cute and then you don't necessarily out. So in that search, there's probably a handful stateside that had or offered adult photos. And I ended up using a sperm bank actually that was in the Northeast because they had that. And,
and when you see the photos, are they all like laid out? Is there an app? How do you go about that? And what information does someone share?
There wasn't an app. When I did it, I had to subscribe to the service so I could go in and search and then see all those things. And they offer a lot of details about the donor. So like age of donation, the type of donation they did, or like the way that the sperm was prepared for a particular kind of IVF. There's all these things you have to learn. They do genetic testing. They do obviously like the normal aesthetic type stuff, eye color, hair color, kid pictures, adolescent pictures, adult photos. They even have recording of them interviewed so you can hear their voice. They answer questionnaire about their temperament, hobbies, what their current job is, things like that.
This is as thorough as going out on multiple dates with someone.
I guess.
Really say this is a quality individual.
Right.
And they're going to be 50% of the thing that I'm going to invest more time and effort into than anything else in my life.
Yeah. So what was interesting actually that I learned on one of those Zooms from the Meetup Single Mom by Choice group was I didn't realize that some sperm could be quote unquote competitive. A mom had talked about sending an alert for when a donor had replenished their stock because it could be like Coachella, I guess, and like the stuff go out. And I was like, oh my God.
That's interesting.
Do this? Am I going to have to make sure I log on, have multiple browsers open so I can make sure I can get the sperm that I wanted? It ended up not being the case for me. I was able to secure the sperm that I needed. I needed 3 vials because I wanted to try 2 IUIs, which is basically like where...
what is an IUI?
Intrauterine insemination. So they basically take that sperm donation or the sperm and insert it into your past your cervix intrauterus and hope for the best while you're ovulating. Right. A lot of couples will do that as a cheaper means before going further into, egg retrievals and fertilization like that, right? It's a non-surgical or non-science, I don't know, an easier way.
I know there's a lot of different steps. And amongst our peer group, there are some individuals who just get pregnant easy. They go, we want to have kids that week.
Totally.
We put on some candles, made magic happen, and went. And then there's other friends of ours who it is an absolute battle and struggle to do it. And they go through IVF and sometimes they have miscarriages, which are extremely heartbreaking.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's very common. Very common. Yeah.
It is very common.
Yeah.
And it's something, right? We saw that with talking about people being open, and I appreciate you being open and having this conversation and really putting your heart out there.
Yeah.
Because people do go through miscarriages and so a lot of times people don't talk about that.
Yeah.
So you went through the IUI process.
Yeah.
Did that take?
Obviously not. So IUI is a really good alternative if you have an endless supply of sperm. And usually, if you're in a hetero coupled relationship or I guess even non-hetero, if you have an endless supply of sperm, it's a cheaper alternative. And they did recommend that it can take on average at least like 4 IUIs for a couple to successfully conceive, and that's actually with maybe even some medicine too. But I thought I would try it because how nice would it be if one of those 2 times took and I could have some cost savings and not go through like hormone injections and et cetera, et cetera. Because let's be real, I've never willingly had sperm in my body. Like, you know what I mean? Like if any time that had happened in the past with contraception failures or whatever, I was like, oh my God, like fresh. So I was like, let's see if it takes. And it didn't take the 2 times. And again, I want to be clear that my doctors recommend usually it takes at least 4. Couples do many, many months. And I didn't have the luxury to do, they're timing your ovulation. And so many times they'll actually they'll do 2 IUIs back to back sometimes because of the ovulation window. And again, I didn't have the luxury of like endless sperm. So once those 2 didn't take, I decided just to fertilize my eggs. And my fertility clinic used something called ICSI, where they actually like try to find like the choice sperm and then fertilize the eggs like individually that way. And it's really interesting because
how do you find it? What is a choice
so
sperm?
it's actually
is it the one who's like swimming faster than anyone else?
Yeah, and hopefully I'm not gonna totally muck this up, but way that it was kind of explained to me is that the sperm kind of almost go through like a Spartan race. They like put them, and then whichever ones end up at the end is kind of what they see as like a win.
I love it.
But also they do, aesthetic stuff. So there's like motility, which is like how they swim, and then I can't remember what the word is for like how they look. But remember in bio class, like you don't want the one with like the corkscrew tail or like the cube shaped head. So, but I thought that was really fun way to describe like the sperm going through Spartan race. And
most of the listeners on this podcast are actually guys, so this will be something that is new to most of us and very informative. And I'm sure they'll share it with
they want the strong
with their girlfriends, friends who are girls.
Strong swimmers that look good. Morphology, right, so that was the word, morphologies.
So that's how we pick it. You pick the winners.
Yeah.
You pick the girl.
Yeah. And then this is obviously going to be like this is a whole separate podcast about IVF and how IVF is a roller coaster because at every step you just don't know until you know. Like you don't know. So I actually was fortunate I was able to do 2 egg freezing since it was covered. I wasn't originally going to do the second round, but since it was covered, I was like, why not? And my doctor was like, more eggs, the better. And thank goodness I did that because most of my eggs from the first round didn't survive the thaw. And so then my second round, they had actually given me a different drug to improve my egg quality, which was interesting because at the time of the first draw, they didn't really say anything was bad. But as we discussed, IVF is kind of new and my eggs were a little bit darker. And I joked, well, I have more melanin. So maybe it's like chicken eggs, like, is it that thing? But then the outside of my eggs kind of looked weird, but there's not a lot of hard evidence to say that those things indicate poor egg quality. So then the second
But had your second round was higher egg quality.
Yes, overwhelmingly. And so this is where I say it's a roller coaster and you don't know until you know. So most of those first rounds of eggs that survived the thaw, they called me and said, hey, we have to go into your second round of eggs to fertilize. Because for a high chance of live birth, they want you to have at least like, I think 4 embryos. And so again, most of those eggs didn't survive the thaw. They couldn't like fertilize. So they went to my second round and they called me like, hey, we've already done like half of your second and we are basing it off of like the quality of my first. And he was like, what do you want to do with the rest? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, we might as well just, get you there because you want a live child. This is where I would say if I had.
So how many eggs were put into your uterus?
Just one. My clinic.
Just one.
All right. One embryo. Yeah.
One embryo.
Yeah. Cause they're trying to limit multiples. I think my clinic would do it if you like really requested. Or depending on the embryo.
Probably one embryo. I can only imagine in a partnership, and let's speed up. So one embryo goes in.
Yep.
9 months.
Yep.
You go through 9 months of pregnancy. Quickly take us through the different times where I'm going to tell you a quick story. We went to get the ultrasound to see the gender of the baby.
Yeah.
And my wife and I, we said, don't say anything. Just write boy or girl in the envelope, put it in there. We're going to send it to my brother. He's going to bake a cake when we all get together, and blue boy, pink girl. So she's doing it. And she goes, oh, yeah, this one's really obvious. And we said, oh, yeah, it's really obvious. It's not like you're going to go, that's a vagina. That's an obvious vagina. Like, obviously, it's a penis. It's a penis.
Oh.
So we look at each other and we're like, this is lame because we know what it is. So we called up both our moms, her sister, and we opened an obvious. Our firstborn child was a boy because it's obvious. So in the future, you really got to say, hey, we're going to do this special thing. Don't do it. But when I think about those moments, you're doing this by yourself, or are you doing it by yourself? Are people coming into these interesting key check-ins, right? There's the 10-week check-in. How's the baby's heartbeat? There's the 20 weeks. Is it a boy or a girl? You get past 32 weeks.
Yeah.
Where you go, at least
every week.
The child is viable. And if I have the child today, he or she is going to be great.
No, I didn't go to appointments with me, really. I didn't have that expectation. I'm sure if I had asked somebody if they wanted to join or if they could join for me, obviously, they would have, but I didn't ever ask. So I was doing all those appointments myself because I signed up for it myself. So, yeah.
Did you know it was going to be, did you know the gender prior to?
I did. So, yeah. So when I did, because again, advanced maternal age and I wanted to have a high chance of success.
You would know.
Yeah, I did genetic testing to make sure. And then there's different gradings of the embryos. And so I had 4 really highly graded embryos. 3 of them were girls and 1 was boy. And I just told my doctor to choose one and they chose girl. And then I actually was like, oh, I think I want a girl. So it ended up working. It worked out. So I actually have a lot of embryos. I'm really fortunate from that regard. So finishing my story from before, my second round of eggs were overwhelmingly high performance.
Healthy.
And
Great.
so now I have more. Again, this is that point of regret. I wish I had preserved those other eggs and said, like, let's just see what happens. I wish I'd hung up the phone, called someone, and not had felt that pressure to respond immediately. Even though there was a time pressure, I should have just been like, I need 10 minutes. Like, I need to just like call someone and ask. And I wish I had preserved those other unfertilized eggs again, maybe because just in case I ever met someone. Not to say that I couldn't still do another egg retrieval and maybe my eggs are fine, but yeah. So I kind of regret that. But you don't know, you don't know. And I have 11 embryos.
Maybe someone who's listening to this is going to give you a call for some advice.
Exactly.
At some point in time.
I just pregnant positive. Yeah. I have met with a lot of other women that are considering this, and I'm happy to have paid it forward. And I definitely said that, share that. The other bit of advice that I actually read about, somewhere I don't remember, was that when I was going through this process, one of the best things that came up from it was to grieve, like the idea I had. So I'm getting emotional.
No, we can also pause for a second if you want to. Thank you for coming on here and opening up your heart. And it's also a unique conversation amongst 2 people. We've known each other for a long time. And with that, I have a different side. I'm not going to be the one who is carrying a child for 9 months. Once that child comes out, now, don't get me wrong, those 9 months are tough. Very, very tough. But then the work gets started. At least from my point of view is going to be different than someone who's carrying a child.
Yeah. So the grieving was like, the expectation I had of having a family or the idea of that, right? So that was.
Let's pause for a second. Do you want water for a second? We'll edit it out. I don't edit stuff, but get some water, hang out. We don't have I'm going to also let you view all this before.
Oh, no, I know. It's fine. It's weird because I don't get emotional. I don't know why. Or maybe it's because I had just seen you and like all of our friends. And
you want me to tell you a funny story from that?
Sure.
Do you remember the movie Don't Be a Menace to Society, or Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your gin and juice? And you have your daughter's absolutely wonderful, well-behaved, great demeanor.
What you thought.
But when we took a picture of the 3 of us, and you said that joke, you're like, I don't use kids' names because it's their thing, but you're like, Ask the nice man, are you my daddy?
Yeah, daddy.
And that will be a conversation we'll dive into, because I'm sure at a certain stage in life, when she's older, she's going to have that question. She's going to say,
Yeah.
and you live in Southern California, so she might say, let's use some like common names nowadays. Madison has a mom and dad.
Right.
Isabella has two dads.
Yeah.
Samantha has two moms. And she's going to say, and who, right, initially, at least right now, she might say, why do I only have one mom?
Right.
And that will be, I'm sure you have thought about those conversations that you'll have with her. And let's talk a little bit about parenting, because it's not easy. And there are difficult children. There's easy children. My older child is he's smart as can be, but he's more difficult. And there are times that, thank goodness, I had someone to tap into the ring to say, can you just watch after him? I need to go for a run.
Yeah.
Or my boys' trips don't happen that often, or when I was traveling for work, it was not easy enough, because we're two working parents, to say, can you look after this little one, maybe take off work a little bit early, pick up from daycare, drop off from daycare. Talk a little bit about the challenges of raising a child by yourself.
I mean, definitely. I mean, it's something that I signed up for, so I don't feel any type of way. Definitely can feel overwhelmed sometimes. And to your point about I can't take a break. I'll have to be really intentional about trying to plan breaks, or finding time for myself while they're with childcare at school, preschool, daycare, nanny, whatever it might be, or just getting a babysitter. And then to your point about how she's going to get raised, I have the donor's pictures already framed. I had it for my baby shower because I knew people were going to be curious. And I was like, oh, I'll just keep it. And it's in her room, a donor 6079. So I don't know their name, obviously. I picked the donor, though, that would be open to getting contacted when she's 18. So if she chooses to do that, I'll be more than supportive. And hopefully that person's around to engage with her and may or may not build a relationship. So I'm just going to be open from the get-go and let her know that she's loved, and she has other, male figures in her life that she can go to if she needs that kind of perspective. I have two older brothers, plenty of friends, that I'm sure.
Tell me about the biggest joys. You've seen parents who have the traditional mom and dad raising two kids. I know for me, a downside of having a second parent is both my kids like my wife better than me. And you won't have that problem.
Yeah.
Tell me a little about the joys that you have when it's just the two of you.
I mean, it's definitely something I wanted, and her laughter is an instant serotonin birth. It's the kids laughing is just, especially babies, is so pure and joyful. And I'm really lucky that she's a happy, emotive baby. She's very cuddly. She laughs a lot. She's very emotive. She's funny. And it's just interesting to watch her grow and learn. And that's been the most fulfilling. She's happy. So I'm just praying that I can raise her to be a vibrant and kind human. Yeah, it's what I wanted. Yeah.
From someone who's thinking you're not a mother, you're a mom. And that's a big difference. You've been a mom for a couple years now, almost a couple years.
Yeah.
What is some advice that you'd give someone who's raising a child by themselves? And I think we talked about your journey of making the conscious decision of, I'm going to be a mother. I'm going to raise this child by myself. If I find someone else, they will help come in and be a part of our family. You did that. But what are some advice, whether it's any single parent that's out there, mom or dad, what's advice that you would think that someone who's going to take on this big challenge would like to know?
I think not being afraid to ask for help. I don't like to ask for help unless it's like really, really needed, because I have this idea of like not wanting to put people out. But I've been getting better about asking for help. I think planning is good as much as possible, or getting intentional about something. A friend had a good suggestion about just designating a day where I have childcare after hours so that I can do, like we were talking about, a little self-care or go to dinner with my friends, or maybe even, that's the designated day I go on dates. And I'm like, hey, I have from like 5 to 8 on Thursdays. You want to meet? Let's do something, get a massage, haircut, whatever it is. And then that way I won't have to be overwhelmed by the planning. If every time that has to happen, it's just pre-planned and I actually have fun trying to figure out what to do with that time. And maybe it's nothing. So I thought that was a really powerful suggestion, just to like build it into my routine, like whatever day. Yeah. And it's like, they were couples actually. I told a lot of my couple friends, I'm like, you guys should just designate the day every other week or whatever. And it's like date night for us, or
You
you
are
go on our
spot
separate
on.
ways. Yeah. And then we have that secured babysitter or childcare these days. And yeah, we either do something together or do something alone or whatever it might be. But I was like, just getting rid of the logistic part, because I think the logistic part, as things come, is what gives me a lot of anxiety or overwhelming. Like even just traveling to DC to see everyone, I had so much anxiety about it. And like, how do I entertain her on the plane? How do I get a car seat? What do I do with the
It
stroller?
worked out.
No, totally. And I
And,
feel
and you're going to do it again. And
I'm
now
totally,
they
yeah,
get
I feel
travel all
totally
over the
fine.
place with her.
It was way worse than I had imagined. It was way better than I imagined.
Easier.
Yeah, so much easier.
Now, I do have a question. So you talked about male influence, because regardless, there's a difference between guys and girls.
Yeah.
And even in our family, I know one side is we're both caring, we're both loving. But when discipline comes in, someone is more strict. Or even when we are teaching our kids about athletics, I'm the one who's out there really showing the mechanics of athletics. And let's call it the traditional dad responsibilities that are out there. When we're building a bed frame, I get the kids, we get the power tools, and under the guidance of myself,
Yeah.
we'll use a power tools and we'll build a bed.
Yeah.
How are you making sure that your child gets that good balance, the love and care that naturally comes to you, but also that discipline, that's ferocity, that is traditional, more for a father?
I mean, again, I have 2 older brothers and one is fairly close in NorCal. So I think he'll be a good influence from that regard. And I have a lot of like local friends, my friends' spouses or other single men that could come in for those maybe more traditional type roles. But also like, I can do those things. I'm fairly athletic and fairly handy. And we got YouTube now, and I'll sign her up for all the classes, and hopefully she can get some extra mentorship from those activities that she does or at school. So I'm not too worried about it. There's been single parents for like decades, and kids turn out fine.
When you say there's been single parents for decades,
Or
I now have a greater, and even longer that, right? For the dawn of time, right? Stuff has happened. I have so much more of a greater appreciation for those who are raising children by themselves. It's not easy. And if there are times when someone who does have 2 parents and they can say, hey, I'm going to go volunteer to coach a team, because you just have a little bit more capacity. It's realistic that 2 parents have a little bit more capacity to get stuff done. And I think as a community, we all gotta raise our kids to be good individuals. The other thing that we're gonna do for you, because I've seen this with other single parents, for Valentine's Day, which is coming up, people should go out. If you know a single parent, get them an Uber Eats card. Let them have a meal to themselves. So we'll coordinate that offline, because you deserve it. You work twice as hard as most of us on the parenting side.
Single Awareness Day. Yeah.
What else should we know about this experience that we didn't touch upon?
I don't know. I think if it's something that you're considering, or you've always wanted to be a mother and go through pregnancy, having a partner or the plan doesn't preclude you from it. It might just be a different timeline, right? Maybe you have the baby first and then you get your partner. But if motherhood from a biological perspective, it's something that you want to experience. Like, don't let the fear and anxiety overwhelm you and just take it step by step. I think that's really the key. I never had doubts about it, actually, when I was pursuing it. I just knew I was going to do it. And again, that was actually probably the most hard, was dealing with the overwhelming amount of information to process or like consider. And again, I think I only pre-plan so much because I get overwhelmed, and then I kind of hit the obstacles as they come. And then in hindsight, have regrets that like I should have researched something a little bit more.
That's parenthood.
But yeah, que sera.
When 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when our kids are having kids, they're going to they think that we know what we're doing, but we're still just learning on the fly. And each year that it goes up, there's a new challenge, and you can plan, but obviously things occur.
Yeah, and we're in the information age. There's so much information available. If you pursue it, people are more than willing to talk to you. I've been so blessed to have connections to talk to me about, from either single moms by choice, independent moms, potential moms, whatever you want to call it, or by just moms themselves, or even maybe other parents, like you're saying, dads, about advice that they would take or throw away that they've received. And then I joined a bunch of groups on Facebook from my local communities, and I'm able to search posts about the good preschools or whatever experience or activities to take Ro and I to over the weekends. So yeah, there's a lot of resources if you seek them out, and people will help more than you think, I think. Yeah.
To wrap everything up, I want to start by thanking you for coming on here and sharing your story, your journey, and inspiring all of us. It's applicable as if you want something, go make it happen.
Yeah.
And even more importantly, I got to meet your daughter this past weekend. What an absolute joy. You hit the lottery with her. Just cute, smart, and I look forward to seeing all the pictures come out on Instagram and the updates, and hearing about you from you directly, or even from mutual friends that we have. And have fun with this. You're at a great age. I'll always be a couple years ahead of you in the parenthood, and enjoy it. I wish you guys the best.
Yeah.
And just to finish up, thanks for coming on here and putting your heart out there and sharing the story. Thanks you for helping us jonesing some life.
Yeah,
Take care.
thank you.